being here.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Chair. And certainly I appreciate the invitation by the committee and staff here at the National Academy of Sciences. By probably my best way to describe, if I have any conflicts, is to tell you a little bit real quickly about our association. Often referred to in the alcohol arena as the Big Tent. Primarily, we are an association that represents state agencies that are involved in the control of beverage alcohol. That means both from a regulatory perspective as well as from a distribution and sales perspective. For those of you that are in the general area, Virginia, Pennsylvania, Montgomery County, Maryland, West Virginia, North Carolina, these are states that are generally reviewed as control, and I'll touch on that in a moment. But I do want to say that our membership includes members of the beverage alcohol industry from all three sectors, beer, wine, and spirits, as well as from all three tiers, manufacturer, wholesaler, retailer. But our primary responsibility, and you'll see this in a moment, is about controlling and regulating the alcohol beverage environment here in the United States. So we work not only with our state members, but also with regulators around the country. And in fact, we have a very close relationship with regulators in Canada as well as other countries throughout the world. Quite frankly, if you were to go back and take a look at why these agencies were created, they were not created around revenue. They were not created solely around wanting to make sure that a certain product's available to the consumer. But if you look at the preamble of most of the liquor codes in this country, it is about the protection of public health and safety. So certainly you will pick up part of that throughout. I do want to talk real quickly a little bit of history. I plan to spend most of my remarks on what the state of the states are right now and what we are facing at state level in respect to policies and issues related to regulation. But I think it's important to go back and understand a couple real quick things about how we've gotten to where we are today. The committee members will be provided with a publication. If it's not been delivered yet, it will be delivered today. It's called Toward Liquor Control. That document was something that was actually commissioned by John D. Rockefeller as they realized the U.S. was going to come out of prohibition. How best do we regulate this market? How best do we figure out that we not go back to the days of the open saloon and the problems certainly that were attendant to that circumstance? The primary experiences we had with the alcohol marketplace until this document was created was a poorly regulated market before Prohibition, and during Prohibition, a completely illegal market. So there wasn't a lot of experience with how we were going to regulate this in a sound and a way that was in the interest of the public. The document itself, if you take a look at it, you will begin to get a sense for the conversations that were taking place at that point. And ultimately, what that report said is states you have a couple of choices. One of those being whether you want to be a controlled jurisdiction or a licensed jurisdiction. I'm not going to get into that description except to say that, as I mentioned earlier, control those states that are actually involved in the actual sales process in some form or fashion. In other words, they are a participant in the market primarily because their governors, their legislature said, we believe this is one of the best ways to regulate this market, to try to really reduce the profit motive and to make sure that we provide this product primarily in a way to balance public and private interests. So with that, though, I want to make it very clear. Whether you are from a controlled jurisdiction or you are from a licensed jurisdiction, you indeed have a complex web of regulations, laws that are designed to control and regulate beverage alcohol. So let's talk a little bit about what the motivating factors were then and what they are today, because we have to go back to those in order to create, again, a balance. And that was number one, protect health and public safety, as I mentioned earlier. Second, revenue was critically important, especially at the time we were coming out of Prohibition. Keep in mind that if you were to go back and look at the political science analysis of why the country came out of Prohibition, a great deal part of it was the country needed money. So there needed to be a way to make certain we were efficiently and effectively collecting the taxes and revenue that would come from that business. The third was to eliminate unfair and illegal marketing practices. A lot of the problems that occurred before Prohibition and what we wanted to make sure we didn't go back to then and we don't go back to today is making certain we have a legal marketing strategies and a even playing field for all those involved in this business. That we had referees, that we had someone looking over all aspects of the market, and we created a marketplace that was not going to be about selling as much product as we possibly can and making as much money as we possibly can, but that we had to balance the interest of providing a product that we now have said is legal and balancing that with the public interest. And again, that goes to the balance of interests. So I'm not going to go into a lot of detail. If I did, I would need about a 4-day seminar to go into what alcohol regulation may look like. But I do like to put it in frames of what often those are thinking about beverage alcohol and how it interacts, and it's part of a greater environment in 4 things. And these are also things you'll see public health advocates and experts talk about. But most of our regulation really is about product, the actual product we're providing. What's it look like? How do we regulate it? How do we make sure the wrong products don't get into the wrong hands? It's about price. It's about making certain that we have some equilibrium, that it is not a race to the bottom for prices. It's about promotion, making sure that if we're going to be allowing this product to be advertised and promoted, that it's done in a responsible and in a way that is not harmful to the public or harmful to the industry. And the last issue is place. Where is it sold? This is an extremely interesting issue today, because if there's any one of these 4 issues that is changing rapidly in today's marketplace, it is place. We are not talking about bricks and mortar anymore, whether it's on or off premise. We're talking about applications that allow third-party deliverers. We're talking about an online virtual retail marketplace. So this area of regulation is changing rapidly. So what are some of those changes beyond what I just mentioned? And I want to talk about these, but before I do that, I am going to ask you to put a vision in your mind, and I will touch on this at the end. And think about our experience or our environment around alcohol as a superhighway that crosses a large span of water, or a bridge, so to speak. Because what I'm going to talk about, and my role here today, again, is not to talk about the science, not to talk about individual interventions. There's tremendous science out there, whether it's the Community Prevention Services Guide, or whether it's other very well-researched experience with the interventions that do and don't work. What I'm interested in talking to you about is this larger environment that is the structure underneath the way that this marketplace operates in the United States, which is critically important to anybody that is concerned about the potential harm that it may bring, whether it's on our roadways, whether it's in our schools, whether it's on our college campuses, whether it's in our homes. This structure, this network underneath that road that this market is operating on, and we as a public operate on, is very important to keep in mind. So with that, what are we experiencing? We're experiencing a decreased resources for alcohol regulation and enforcement. There have been plenty of, while not necessarily peer-reviewed, reports done on what the resources are today in states and in communities around alcohol law enforcement. Regulation, as you look around the country, we see budgets being cut for regulatory agencies. We see alcohol regulators sometimes 3 and 4 and 5 levels down from a cabinet level position. What is one of the most important public health issues for any jurisdiction often is buried in other bureaucracy, or certainly having resources cut. The second is the new and expanding outlet types and models. As I mentioned, we're not talking just about whether or not alcohol is now being sold in beauty salons and movie theaters and bowling alleys, which, by the way, all 3 they are. Oh, also, by the way, retirement homes. But it's about what this marketplace looks like today. This marketplace is not just bricks and mortar. It is online. It is virtual. It is an increasing demand for the product in a place and a time and a manner that I, as a consumer, want that product. And we all know about the increasing level of online activity, the online sales, home delivery. Licensing changes. Often one of the ways that states allow for these different outlets to be available to try to quote unquote meet the demand or modernize the system, we often look to change licensing procedures. That may be allowing online virtual licensing. It may be changing up what where we're going to provide it in those outlets. I point this out because this is, again, a very complex area. Often it's where it's a balloon analogy. You push in one place, it's going to push out at another. And we have to be careful about those unintended consequences when we start to change licensing schemes. Erosion of the three-tier system. I could spend one day just on the three-tier system, but very quickly, this is the idea that when we created this market and we wanted to control it, we didn't want to have vertical integration. We didn't want the same company owning manufacturers, wholesalers, and retailers. That by keeping those three separate, we had a better chance at making sure everybody was going to operate responsibly. We were going to have more efficient tax and revenue collection. But more importantly, there would not be the kind of demands put on retailers that were put on by manufacturers in the days before Prohibition. And often there was a race to bottom in prices. A great deal of the problems related to alcohol and to the open saloon was around this idea that they were quote unquote tied houses, that the bar in the community was owned by a large manufacturer, whether it's in that community or they're a multinational. I will talk about in a few moments on what some of the pressures are, but what's interesting about this today is that at one time it was the manufacturers that held a great deal of the power and a great deal of the influence in the industry. I would argue today it's retailers. And I'll talk a little bit more about that because I think this is an important thing to keep in mind when we think about who is driving policy or some of these policy changes. We're concerned about product safety. Right now, we have also in this country a entrepreneurship around beverage alcohol in the craft distilling, the craft brewing, and in wines. But the question is, how safe are we? Are we sure of what is in that bottle, what the process is? As these products explode, as breweries, as distillers explode, are we comfortable that we have our arms around the quality of those products? The resources at the U.S. Treasury Tax and Trade Bureau today really haven't changed significantly over the last couple of decades. And we know we have many, many more products, many, many more actual manufacturers out there. We certainly have a product coming into homes that may be being developed by a local producer or even an international producer. We don't really sometimes know exactly what's getting into the marketplace. So there's a need to keep focused on product safety. If we do away with this structure, if we eliminate or if we decrease the potential for understanding what's in this marketplace, we also should have some product safety concerns. By the way, probably the best example of this was a new product that, well, actually wasn't all that new. It had been around for a while, but it hit the marketplace a few years ago in the form of powdered alcohol. It was a product that caught most of our regulators completely off guard. We were surprised it was approved. And as it turns out, most of our states today have banned that. Moving on, I want to talk a little bit about what's driving this change. I talked about big box, grocery, superstar chain influence. You think about it, go out and look at the Fortune 100. You're not going to find large beverage alcohol manufacturers in the Fortune 100, but you will find these large retailers. And increasingly, they are getting involved in state alcohol policy, in providing alcohol in grocery stores, big box retailers. This is a change for the marketplace. From the days of the mom and pop, from those that were very community-oriented entities. It's really a change, and it's something that is driving a great deal of regulatory change at the local level. Local and craft products, alcohol tourism, a lot of changes in regulation to provide more opportunities for these kinds of companies. It has eroded the three-tier, it has really eroded the three-tier system in many states. This idea that we have to really support this because it's about tourism in our area, about economic development. My only, while that's perfectly fine, we need to make sure we balance that with what the public health and safety concerns are with that community. Customer convenience focus. When I hear these debates at the state level or in boardrooms, it is primarily about what's the best thing for the consumer. Remember, the consumer is the primary focus of legislation, yet often 1/3 of that population are abstainers. So are we really focused on the total population or just one part of it, the consumer? There is a dissatisfaction with government. So when government's involved in the regulation of anything today, it seems to be getting criticized and certainly a desire to do away with it. We see that as part of this debate. And the last thing, and I think this is really important for those that, when I have an opportunity to speak in front of local groups, there isn't a great deal of conversation about alcohol abuse in general. We just don't have a great deal of that conversation. So we don't seem to have that balancing often in these discussions. We have seen some national articles lately that seem to be going the other direction, but there is an apathy about how much potential harm there is from alcohol. So the impacts of this deregulation, and I do want to point out, regulators, the alcohol industry, and public health. I have heard this in all three audiences. They're concerned about losing the referees. They're concerned about the pressure on different players in the industry to promote and to market more aggressively. They're concerned about their product being treated the same as any other product in a grocery store or in the consumer market. They're concerned about consumer safety, and they're worried about losing the balance. And I think that's the thing that is most concerning to those that watch these debates going forward. The last thing I mentioned, I said about thinking about the analogy of the bridge. So much of what I just identified in these areas really begin to erode that structure under that bridge. We may not be able to easily see how anything here specifically focuses on reducing impaired driving or underage drinking or any other or college drinking, but they are the things that keep us in equilibrium because this product is legal. This is a market that is economically important to our country and to our states, but at the same time it has harm when it's misused. To take away this structure, to in any way really begin to take away those tenets of that structure is important, and understanding that it does ultimately have an impact. Maybe not today when you pull that piece out, maybe not tomorrow when you pull this piece out, but at some point it's going to crumble. And that would be my last comment in respect to the presentation. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much.